Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Barnabás Sztán-Kovács, and in this presentation we are going to dive into the topic of hookers and autopsy. So first things first, who am I? As you can see, my name is not for the weak, so I just use my initials, and you can follow me on Twitter by the handle cybersk. The ink is freshly dyed on my BSc, and I am an student of the Crisis IT Security Lab here in Budapest. Right now, I'm a technical innovation advisor at MRG Effitas. I know it sounds like bullshit, but it's like part cybersecurity engineer and bigger part making my colleagues' lives much harder. But they can tell you that also. And another interesting thing, I was a Blue Team participant at NATO's Log Shields partner run last year. And I had the idea to put these beautiful Hungarian letters in passwords. And when the red team had to put these beautiful Hungarian letters in the passwords, they didn't like me that much. So basically, I'm just good at delivering misery to people. But that's enough from me. Let's talk about the talk. In this presentation, you will be introduced a fantastic tool for monitoring and reverse engineering. You will know how to monitor and manipulate applications, and not only on Windows, but also on other platforms. Personally, I have never tried a bad hooker, but as Frida was my first one, but my colleagues have told me a lot about bad hookers and that they come with a lot of problems and they raise even more problems, and they just randomly crash when you try to attach them or detach them or things like that. So before we go into the presentation, I want to make some things clear before we start. The subtitle is Hookers and Autopsy, so I want to talk about this in a few minutes before anyone would misunderstand me. So what is hooker? Hooking is a general term as it covers a wider range of techniques, and these techniques work in a special way as they monitor or manipulate intercepted function calls and events and messages passed between the software components. And while we are here, let's talk about the misbelief that hooking is always something bad or something evil. It's not. So hooking is utilized by many non-malicious applications like debuggers, antivirus software, benchmarking software. So they all operate by utilizing hooking, and they're still not malicious. So in this presentation, hooker is the application or script which does the hooking. The other one is autopsy. So during this so-called autopsy, our goal is to get as much information about the behavior, the inner state of the autopsied application as much as we can. But we just can't ask the application like, hey, what are you doing inside? Because it won't answer, so we will need some tools to tinker with. These tools are disassemblers, which are investigating the application in its static state while it's not running. So it's like the real autopsy the doctors execute on dead patients. And there are debuggers which do the same, but in runtime, so while the application is alive and running. And this is the kind of autopsy doctors don't do. So you may have figured it out. It's kind of obvious now that autopsy is basically reverse engineering in this talk. But, you know, hookers and reverse engineering doesn't sound that fancy. That's not good for marketing. So, yeah. So, let's start with a quick hands-up poll. Who have ever tried to somehow reverse engineer or peek into an application by debugging, by disassembling, or even opening the notepad counts? Wow, we are pretty many hackers down there. It's cool. And how many of you have tried the hooker in these terms? There's a bit fewer now. Okay, pretty cool. let's get down to business. I present some of the tools which can be used for reverse engineering applications and evaluate from a beginner hacker's point of view. So, first on our list is Windbg. It looks like this. It's cool and all, but it has some really nice features, but it looks very pale, and it's not so user-friendly for a beginner, for unexperienced eyes. It's pretty confusing and really triggers the what the fuck is this feeling in unexperienced people. So we are going to need another tool. And I thought about Immunity Debugger. It's next on our list. As we can see, it has some pretty happy bright colors, and it's dark, like it has a night mode, and we all know that real hackers only use night mode, so it's like 200% cooler than Windbg. But the problem is that we only see weird hex dumps and addresses and assembly code, so I think for a beginner it still really triggers the WTF factor. So we are going to need another tool for this, which is API Monitor. It peeks into an application's Windows API usage, and we can see what Windows API calls have the trace application called. This is more like it, because as you can see, it's informative, it has letters, it's descriptive, it doesn't cause a mental breakdown for less experienced people. So it's cool for us. Sadly, it has no dark mode, but one's got to make sacrifices. So API Monitor is a pretty good choice. But let's say we not only want to monitor applications, but we also want to manipulate them. Then we can use Frida. Frida has no graphical user interface, sadly, but that's not a problem because real hackers only use terminals. And Frida can trace functions in applications. It can operate as a debugger. It can discover internal functions in runtime for tracing and intercepting and manipulating. Yeah, it's cool, but what does it mean exactly? So Frida is a dynamic instrumentation toolkit. It does its thing by injecting Google Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine into a process and then executes your own JavaScript in the application. A few things about Frida. It's free as in freedom. It's portable on multiple platforms such as Windows, macOS, Linux, for mobile devices like Android and iOS, and even on QNX, which I didn't know it existed until now, but actually it's an embedded platform, and I think that's pretty cool that we have this stuff for embedded platforms too. And it's excessively scriptable in many languages such as Swift and Python and .NET and JavaScript and even in C. Okay, so we know what Frida is, but how does Frida work? For this model, there we have our executable, which has the addresses of the Windows API calls it uses in a table called import address table. This table is empty by default, and when the application launches, it fills up with the memory addresses of the Windows API calls the application will be using during its run. And on the other side, there we have our Windows API with the functions implemented, the body of the functions, the real working functions, and this is called by the executable during runtime. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's the model, how it works, how a standard application works in Windows. And there comes our tool. It's the Frida, which contains the node and core components in the external tool. And then it injects this little module into our executable, which contains the Frida agent. It has the JavaScript engine and our own JavaScript, which we wrote to who can manipulate the application. And these parts, the external and the inner Frida part, do communicate with JSON messages all along the run. Okay. Now that we know how what Frida is and how Frida works, let's look at some hooking possibilities with Frida. For instance, let's just take a look at this very basic model. So we have the user application, we have the system on the right side, and we have the Frida agent in the middle. Basically, it's in the executable, but it's easier to describe it this way. So the user calls a Windows API function to execute alpha.bat. Our Frida agent is trained to intercept these calls, and it sees that, oh, so execute just entered me, and I want to attach this beta.bat to the executables list. So when it leaves the Frida agent and the executable, it goes to the Windows API in the system and has two arguments to execute alpha.bat, what the user called, and also beta.bat, what our Frida agent wanted to do. For the operating system, it's no problem. It executes it and returns with the answers of both .bat files. And now we have a problem because we have two outputs when the user only called one. So we have to define the only function when the function comes back from the system and goes back to the user. And we have to scrape the beta.bat output and like send it to our server or do something with it. Let's suppose we wanted to gather this information, so we just send it to our server and send the output of alpha.bat back to the user. So the user basically sees nothing about what just happened, and we still got what we wanted. So I guess it's pretty cool because it's just so stealthy and so hacky. Okay, we have this, and we have a very huge load of API calls, but why? What can we use this for? We can do security auditing, which is basically spying on applications. We can manipulate arguments and return values like we did it in the only function when it scraped off an output. And we can do arbitrary execution during the user's API calls, like as we added this beta.bat to the executables list in the model before. So security auditing is, as I said, spying, but this is what basically our API monitor does. And we wanted to do some more. We wanted more functionality, and that's why we chose Frida in the first place. So let's rather take a look at manipulating arguments and return values. By this, we will do this by doing a small demonstration on an average malware's abilities. So I guess everyone knows what malware are. It's technically a malicious software, but what is malware analysis? Well, it's essentially the reverse engineering of that malware sample, the process of learning what is inside the malware, how does it work, its behavior, its function calls, its operation, the service it's connected to. So actually it's pretty much. And why are we doing this? We are doing this because if we learn how the malware works, we can stop it. We can look for that behavior, and we can build a decent protection against it. Now, malware authors know this, and they want to prevent the reverse engineering of the malware, and they do this by these anti-analysis measurements they take. Basically, it's the response to the malware analysis, and it's done by somehow looking for the traces and clues of this reverse engineering thing. Well, it can be done really many ways, but the most basic one is checking for virtual machine existence. But why? Because malware analysts analyze malware in virtual machines as they don't want to analyze malware in their own computer, as doctors don't bring their patient to home and autopsy it on their lunch table. So VM checking is the most easy thing, and it's easily done by checking in the Windows registry for VM traces. There are more sophisticated ways to check for VMs other than checking the registry, but for now, this will be the one we are using. So let's take a small break from storytelling and get our hands dirty. You can't see anything? That's cool. Now you can see. It's even more cooler. So I just happen to have this malware right here on my desktop. And if we launch this malware, we can see that it writes hello world. Is it visible by everyone? Okay. So it writes hello world and exits in a keystroke. And if you execute again and again and again, it does the same thing. So somehow the malware just got the hunch that it's a virtual machine or some analysis environment. Work for me, please. So how will we attach Frida? We can attach Frida on the fly to an application, but the problem is here that the malware already ran the checks. As you can see, it instantly writes out that hello world little line. So we know that it already ran the checks when we will attach with Frida. So we have to somehow make a workaround this problem, and it's done by suspended starting. It's basically creating a process and not giving it, creating a process in a suspended state where it's not getting a single CPU tick or execution possibility from the OS. So when the process is created, it haven't run a single line of code. And then we can attach Frida and then let the malware run while Frida is already intercepting all its API calls. So we need to have the onEnter and only functions designed. I brought this model from the slide before. So we can see the malware passing to OS on the onEnter and getting back the answer through the only. For simplicity reasons, we will design the only function, as we can always give back the answer the malware wants to hear. So how do we reverse engineer this malware? How do we know what does it want to hear or what is it checking for? We can use this little tool here. It's called Process Monitor. It's visible too, cool. And we can check what registry calls the malware makes. We can see that Sztán-Kovács has called these operations for the path of this one. The VirtualBox guest editions, it's a common tool on virtual machines. And we can check that it's right here in our computer. So, okay, we could delete this registry key, but we all know how fragile Windows is. So, let's just try to lie to the malware somehow. To reverse an application on Windows, you have to install Linux on Windows. Yeah, I know. And check for the application on the path for users, name, desktop. And we can see that Sztán-Kovács is here. So we can use this pretty tool. Reverse engineers love it. Strings, and give it our malware. So it gives us a shitload of output, and we don't know what to look at, but we know that from the process monitor that we need to look for registry operations. So we just grep for reg open. And voila, we have these Windows API calls which we are tracing, which we are looking for. So let's pop our code editor and check what JavaScript we have there. So we can see that the API call will be the registry openkeyxw. The DLL name is where this call is in the Windows API. It's stolen from Dux Microsoft. And basically, this is just a lot of logging, and this is our masterpiece, our code which will change the world. If the Windows API call returns 0, it means that the registry key is found. So we have to say it's not found, it's not there. So we just return 2, which is the definition of it's not there, it's not found. And if we now launch our application with this terminal, so this is our Frida detach.py, and this is our stack.net.exe. We just have to launch it. First, I'm not cheating, so as you can see, stack.net.exe is just writing hello world. But if we do it with Frida detach, we lie to the malware. It thinks that it's a real system, and it hacks us. So I gotta clean my computer from my malware now. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.